Good afternoon, everyone. PDGs, District Governor Lyle, fellow governors, fellow Rotarians, welcome to what is really the crux of a Rotary Club, your constitution and your bylaws. This is most definitely, and I'm sorry that the attendance is as poor as it is today, because when things go wrong, there is nowhere else to go but to the Constitution and to your bylaws. Please, I urge you to revisit your Constitution and your bylaws. Look at them after past President Ronald has spoken today. Get with your members, do the club forums, talk about these things because things change. The pandemic is a good example of why you need to update your bylaws so that you don't get caught in the slips. So with those words, I encourage you again, fellow Rotarians, incoming officers, it is your responsibility to be at these sessions. It is your responsibility to be able to impart the information that you learn here to your members. So I urge you to please keep coming. Look at the sessions. If you miss, please go to the district website. All the sessions and the presentations are listed there for you. I also ask that you tell your countrymen these sessions are for your benefit. We don't all know everything, and trust me, every day that I come to these sessions, I learn something else, either from the presentation itself, from the questions that are asked and the answers that are given. So the people that have been assembled here are experts in their fields. Trust me when I say that. So please take in the information of this evening. Ask questions, because these are the people here who can answer your questions, and be informed, be enlightened, and I urge you to be inspired Rotarians leading clubs of transformation. Thanks very much. Over to you, Bal.
Thank you, Sonia. Pleasant good evening, everyone. All protocols observed. On behalf of our training team, it is indeed an honor and privilege to be given this opportunity to introduce our speaker for this evening's session. Ronald Birch Smith is a past president of the Rotary Club of Georgetown, Guyana, having served during Rotary year 2014-2015. He was a member of that club from 2004 until 2020 and is currently the Director of Foundation and Club Administration of the Rotary Club of Garden City, Georgetown, which received its charter from Rotary International on September 17, 2020. So in fact, he is a charter member of the Rotary Club of Garden City. He was also a member of the Interact Club of Georgetown from 1992 to 1996. He is a former chairman of the Guyana Competition and Consumer Affairs Commission and the Value Added Tax Appeal Tribunal. Ronald is currently a director of several large public companies in the areas of manufacturing, banking, and in the insurance industries. He was admitted to practice law since 2001 in Guyana as well as in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and has been an attorney at law at Waldron and Birch Smith of Georgetown, Guyana, for more than 15 years. He is a former president of the Guyana Squash Association and also former president of the Caribbean Squash Association for at least 2 years. Please join me in welcoming our presenter, a highly esteemed and distinguished Rotarian, past president, Ronald Birch Smith. Over to you, Ronald.
Thank you very much, Bhavati, for the kind introduction. I almost didn't recognize some of the things you were saying. DG Lyle, past district governors, assistant governors, DG Lexonia, fellow Rotarians, good afternoon. I'd like to thank the committee that organizes these events for inviting me to make this presentation this afternoon. I suspect the reason why I've found myself here is for sins in the recent and not so recent past. But I'll do my best to atone for those sins, and I hope you'll judge me kindly. The issue, as DG Lexonia pointed out, becomes important in times of crisis. And it's really useful that you anticipate it and avoid the problems before they can arise. If you give me a minute to start sharing my screen, I'll pull up the PowerPoint presentation. Well, I hope it's visible to everyone at this time. Excellent. Thank you very much. The reason why I think this is timely is because in recent years, there have been new opportunities created by Rotary International that are somewhat revolutionary, but also quite timely. The 2016 and 2019 Council on Legislation has made some significant changes regarding membership, termination of membership, attendance, and who can be a Rotarian. These things are usually done through something called the Council of Legislation, which I'll attempt to explain a bit later on. How do you go about making sure that your constitution and bylaws are serving you well? The starting point is to recognize that those are your constitutional documents for your club, and to ensure that they're serving your needs, as DG Sonia said, by carrying out the regular consultations and club forums from time to time. And it should be something that you schedule almost every other year. Because the Rotary clubs are governed by what's called a standard Rotary club constitution, in my former club, our practice was to assume that whatever the standard club constitution said from time to time was the constitution. It was our constitution, which I think was largely correct because we had adopted the standard club constitution at the time of our charter in 1959. And that constitution provided that it would change from time to time as Rotary International changed the standard club constitution. And so the document we would refer to from more often from year to year, or when an issue arose, was our bylaws. So you had two sets of documents that governed us. One we paid attention to and one we did not. And you may find that there are things in the constitution that are not in the bylaws that are critical. And if you're unfamiliar with it, then it may catch you by surprise. Rotary International maintains a surprisingly formal regime, surprisingly because you don't find it in many service clubs, certainly not at the domestic level. But it is not necessarily surprising when you consider the sheer scale of Rotary International, how impossible it would be to run without this very formal regime. Now, the Rotary International Constitution is not something that you need to be familiar with, but it does make interesting reading. It sets out how the overall organization is structured, its committees, its objectives, and all sorts of detailed rules, its relationship with clubs, how district governors are selected and removed, etc., etc. So certainly if you're attending a Rotary International conference or you're participating in the leadership of the district, it will be advisable to be familiar with those two documents. But from day to day for the club, it's not really necessary. The last two, of course, are those that I alluded to earlier, which regulate the clubs. I'll go into a bit about the history of the standard club constitution. Please forgive me. I suspect everyone may not find it as fascinating as I do, but I think it's necessary to place it in its proper context before we discuss what it means. Now, if you go on Google, you can find the papers from every single conference. I've been able to find as far back as the 1916 Convention of Rotary International, which has a transcript of the deliberations during the meeting, all the presentations, all the documents. And I found in there references to a Rotary International Constitution from its very first convention in 1910 in Chicago, which is just about 4 or 5 years after it was formed. At that time, there was something called the National Association of Rotary Clubs because it was still largely a domestic American institution. But it had grown so rapidly in those very few years that it was obviously necessary for it to have some sort of formal structure and regulation. The rapid growth, of course, required that the organizers of the National Rotary Association offered clubs a local club constitution that they were encouraged to adopt when they were formed, so that there would be that similarity in their structure and organization from place to place. And as you know, Rotary very quickly became an international organization. But one of the issues from early on is that those clubs that had been formed in those first, I would say 16, 17 years, is that the constitutions were all very different. And of course, in 1922, by 1922, it became mandatory that you'd have a standard club constitution, which was the name it was given by that time. The name, of course, of the person I'm quoting from who spoke at the 1916 convention on this subject and who had done a lot of work actually between 1916 and 1922 in standardizing the Constitution is familiar to those who are part of the Paul Harris Society or who pay attention to it. The Arch Clump Award, I think, is for those who give the modest sum of 250,000 US, I believe. And he had done tremendous work in this. In fact, you see in the proceedings of the 1916 convention, not just the quote here, but an entire paper on the subject. And he talks about attempting to travel across the world to visit clubs during wars to read their constitution in an effort to try to standardize the subject. So by the 1922 convention, Rotary International had a standard club constitution. This constitution is entrenched in the Rotary International bylaws. And from 1922, it has been practically impossible to form a Rotary club without committing to adopt the standard club constitution. For all the clubs, if you still have your the documents leading to your charter, you will see amongst those in the lovely penmanship of the olden days, commitments by the club to adopt this constitution at their charter and indicating the specific provisions that they have endorsed on it, such as the name of the club, the locality, and that sort of thing. The amendments to this standard club constitution generally can only be made by Rotary International, and this is done by something called the Council on Legislation. A few of those pre-1922 clubs are allowed to maintain their constitutions, but largely they've been encouraged to modify them to meet the general objectives. I think obviously because of the legacy issues, those clubs like to keep it, and a few of them around have made sufficient changes, such as provisions regarding women, which they've been required to change, I think, in the 1980s, especially for the American-based clubs. Etc., etc., etc. I think you may have, it's not the sort of thing Rotary International highlights, but there's some references to things that we would consider socially unacceptable that were in some of the old constitutions that have been changed. So the Council on Legislation, you're familiar with it, obviously. It also has an interesting history. It would have been part of the Rotary International Convention. So if you went to a convention prior to 1977, part of the event was the deliberations of the Council on Legislation, where they go through debates about proposals for amendments to the Rotary International Constitution, the Club Constitution, etc., etc. And its frequency became triennial in their 70s and then was spun off later on. Every district has, I think, 1 or 2 representatives. I'm not sure who's our district representative, but it seems like a thoroughly fascinating event. It's a lively discussion. There are hundreds of motions, resolutions being debated and voted upon. Many don't see the light of day because they're rejected, but I suspect after years of argument, some of them are found to have merit and make their way into a document called the Manual of Procedure, which is published by Rotary International every 3 years. So the council meets, I think, around April, and the Manual of Procedure is published by Rotary International, I think, either at the convention or shortly thereafter. So it is a document that you should refer to from time to time because it contains the text of the current version of the Rotary International Constitution, the Rotary International Bylaws, the Standard Club Constitution, and the recommended Rotary Club Constitution. If it's something that you're a bit of a nerd about and you have the patience for it, reading the report of the Council of Legislation can be interesting for 2 purposes. One, just to get a general idea about what people think about extant rules and what are the proposals for changes that fail. And perhaps more importantly, to identify what specifically has changed. So there might be a dozen things in respect to the Constitution and the bylaws that change every 3 years. The Council has the authority to make changes in between its regular sessions. I think this rarely happens, and when it does, they will probably have a publication on the RI or in the newsletter, which you'll be aware of. So in terms of scheduling when this review of your bylaws and constitution should take place, there are 2 things to consider. One is the timing of the meeting of the Council of Legal Legislation. Sorry, there's something I'm part of called the Council of Legal Education. I keep saying that instead. The Council on Legislation, if you time the review of your bylaws to sometime after the annual conference every 3 years, then you probably have available the manual and the report of the council, which can guide you on what has been changed and what you should consider. That's the first part of it. The second part, of course, is clubs take in new members every day. And so members need to be aware of what the Constitution and the bylaws are. And simply handing it to them and hoping that they read it and understand it is not sufficient. And so one of the things clubs should consider is, while you're waiting for the changes, whether or not it's important enough to have an annual session where you have a discussion about the rules. It's a useful refresher for all members. It's a useful opportunity to consider whether these things still work for you. It may not come up for change every year, but if it's a regular discussion, then people have it at the forefront of their minds to consider. So, as I said in the beginning, the 2016 and 2019 councils were considered somewhat revolutionary, particularly the first one, because for the first time they gave clubs tremendous freedom to determine the frequency of its meetings and the flexibility for rules and requirements. Those of you who've been Rotarians for more than 15, 20 years will recall when you first joined the club that attendance was considered something more important than going to church. It was not just mandatory, it was rigidly enforced. If you didn't make attendance, a past president or some older member of the club would pull you aside and give you a friendly reminder about the importance. Somebody would call you and that sort of thing. I know that in clubs outside of the district, it's even more strictly enforced, where persons are encouraged to resign if they can't attend or make up 50% of their meetings. They're given warnings in advance of the end of the quarter that you're falling behind, you need to do something, etc., etc. And also in clubs where meals are paid for in advance, attendance then becomes expensive. And if you're not attending, you feel as though you're wasting money. So because the modern generation is wild and unruly, after years of suggestions about introducing flexibility to improve membership Rotary International thought it fit to give clubs the flexibility to determine for those clubs what sorts of rules would serve our purposes. Bear in mind that the way this is structured, it is not that Rotary International has said to clubs that attendance is no longer necessary. It's saying to clubs that you choose. And I'll explain to you how this flexibility is created. So we start off with the standard club constitution that sets out the overall framework. It tells you that clubs shall meet at a regular time every week. This is important. It gives you the method of meetings. So an interactive meeting is something where you just post something online that persons read and go through. And that's considered a meeting of the club without even a video conference such as this. You may recall when you first joined clubs or in your own club right now, the idea that a meeting is changed from its regular day is something that persons would become very upset about. If you cancel the meeting or said we'll meet on a Thursday instead of a Wednesday this week, you'd have a riot on your hands because it was just unheard of. The meeting must be held on Wednesday at 12 p.m. at a certain place, which was fine in a certain age, but many clubs have found it to be counterproductive. The Rotary International Standard Club Constitution now says that you may have in your bylaws rules about the regularity of meetings that are entirely different from the standard constitution suggestions. The most important one is that you're now not required to meet every week. So a club may choose that it may meet 3 times per month. It may choose it may meet as infrequently as twice per month. But it's up to the individual club to decide. So in your bylaws, you can have a provision regarding meetings that are entirely different from the broad framework of the standard constitution. You may have your own rules about how to postpone meetings, change meeting dates, change meeting venues, etc., etc. In relation to membership, the council adjusted the criteria for membership, and it's a lot more simplified. Person of good character, who has a good reputation in their community and is willing to serve. You may recall the criteria for membership at one time included things like leadership of an organization or a senior managerial position or holding one of the traditional professions, etc., etc. This, of course, may not have literally excluded vast sections of the community, but it would have made them feel as though there's some sort of elitist social standard to becoming a Rotarian. Many Rotary clubs may prefer to induct members of who hold leadership positions in organizations. But Rotary International is saying that as far as we're concerned, you're good enough just to have good people who are willing to serve in their community and they are of good character. I don't see why you need anything more for Rotarian. Importantly also now is that Rotaractors may also be Rotarians simultaneously. Many Rotaractors enjoy their Rotaract clubs, and while they may have an interest in Rotary, and Rotary Club may have an interest in welcoming them long before they leave Rotaract, there is the view that they would have to choose between the two. And so now a Rotaractor who enjoys his or her membership of Rotary Club can join a Rotary Club if the Rotary Club will help them. And this is part of the provisions on the Article 8 of the Standard Club Constitution. You can have many types of membership, no longer just active and honorary. You can choose whatever they are. It's important to remember that you still have to pay dues for everyone, but you can have different categories of membership and perhaps charge them different dues for the club. Again, at the end of this, what I'll be referring you to is a provision that says that you can have rules that are not necessarily in your bylaws that are not necessarily in conformity with these provisions in the standard bylaws. So the dual memberships provision here in Article 8, Section 5 of the Club Constitution is what would have prohibited a Rotaractor previously from becoming a member of a Rotary Club. So you can have different rules regarding types of membership. You can have different classifications. You can have dual membership. You can have your own rules on honorary membership that suit the needs of a club. I think the practice across the district varies widely. And some clubs, in my former club, we would have encouraged members of the diplomatic corps to become honorary members, and they would remain honorary members until they left. But you can now identify, say, someone who is a supporter of the club for a limited period. They become an honorary member for 1 year. Of course, thereafter, if they want to become an active member, they can. But you can use it to improve your club by having different provisions than previously. So if your meetings are less frequent, so too attendance. You can have provisions in your bylaws regarding attendance that are entirely different from those in the standard club constitution. And a club can regulate its attendance entirely. One of the things a club can do is to say that attendance is now no longer mandatory. Some might regard this as sacrilege, but it is entirely a decision for the club to make. What it means is that you're busy professionals who, when they're interested in Rotary and they're told, well, you must attend our makeup, and then they come and they try faithfully, but life gets in the way, and then there's 3-4 months where they're busy, they don't show up, and somebody scolds them, and they say, something, I like Rotary, it's a nice club, but I don't have the time to do it, and I don't wish to be told by some upstart like Ronald that I am somehow being irresponsible by not showing up. Many years ago, when I was a membership director, the board had a long meeting where we quarreled for hours about warning members about their attendance, and we wrote letters to members saying that if you didn't attend our makeup, you were going to be expelled. Not as bluntly as that, but very close to that. And one insurance executive that I wrote the letter to, smiled, took the letter from me, opened it as he was sitting, and he finished reading before he had sat, and he stopped sitting and got back into an upright position, returned the letter to me and said, I'm leaving. And of course, I had to spend the rest of the week begging him to reconsider. Sorry, I have a very enthusiastic dog outside. If you give me a minute, I'll close the window. Sorry. So it's entirely up to you to decide if you find that, this attendance business is becoming a nuisance, you don't want to bother with it. You're entirely free to do it. You may find though that, one of the essential things of Rotary is that persons come and participate. But telling people that they must be in a certain place at a certain time every week for the rest of their lives is going to be difficult, in 2021 onwards. And so you may want to consider something else. Of course, because attendance can now be not mandatory, so too should termination for non-attendance go. The termination provisions are set out in the different parts of the standard club constitution, termination for not paying dues, etc., but there's also provision regarding termination, and you can exclude it entirely from your rules if you so desire. And these are what the rules would typically look like. You must attend or make up 50% of the meetings, and there are rules about what is considered attendance. You must be in the room for a certain percentage of it, etc., etc. They're long and complex, and there are rules about who can be exempt and why, where, how, and it's a nuisance. It's a nightmare for the secretary to track attendance. Some persons, because they regard attendance as important, get offended if their attendance isn't tracked properly, and it creates a scene, etc., which you may find serves no useful purpose. So it's something to consider. You can also consider changing the rules about what is attendance, or changing the rules about how persons can do makeups. So instead of requiring that persons must do a makeup within 14 days before or after the meeting they missed, you can now provide that persons can do makeups at any time. So if somebody is busy for 2-3 months and they don't have the time to do it, if they so desire, they can make a note of it, and before the end of the half year or the quarter, they can do 6 makeups or a dozen makeups. But again, it's entirely up to the club to decide. If you don't have mandatory attendance, then you don't need rules for termination. But if you keep attendance as, if you keep the rules about attendance with or without any form of flexibility, you're not necessarily required to keep provisions for termination for non-attendance. So you can have the rules with no consequence if you so desire. The standard club constitution, this might be important because it may be an issue about whether or not Rotarians are bound by the Rotary International Constitution and bylaws. Once you pay dues, you're deemed to be bound by the club constitution and the bylaws, and it's on those conditions alone the privileges of the club are maintained. Whether or not you're given a copy of the rules, you're bound by them. And those rules, of course, provide that clubs are bound by the standard club constitution, by the Rotary International Constitution and Rotary International bylaws. Except for the exceptions set out previously in the standard club constitution regarding the different categories I've alluded to, you're not allowed to adopt bylaws that are inconsistent with the Rotary International Constitution and bylaws. So for example, if you formed a club and said we're going to exclude women, that would be unacceptable. And Rotary International can amend their own bylaws and constitution at any time, and they can make changes in the standard club constitution that clubs are required to adopt as soon as they're passed by the council on legislation. In your own bylaws, there are rules about how those bylaws are changed, when it's done at forum, whether it's done by consultation, what role the board plays, etc. There will be provisions about what the vote should be. So you should ensure that you are fully familiar with the mechanism that your bylaws set out for changes. And if, of course, you're going to have a change that is somewhat radical that you don't see specifically referred to in the Constitution, you should make sure that it isn't something in conflict with the other rules that govern us. So, in order to make your club attractive or to get rid of rules that you don't consider really necessary anymore, each of these areas, meetings, attendance, termination, are things that you can consider. It may be that you like the traditional club where you meet every week. Attendance is considered mandatory. It's entirely up to you. If at your forum you find there's broad support for less frequent meetings, I suspect in the post-COVID-19 world, flexibility is going to be something that you find persons are more likely to adapt to easier than in the past. A year ago, if you told your club that we're not meeting in person, we will only meet by Zoom, they would have asked you if you were crazy. It will not happen. You will ruin the club. It will be destroyed. I imagine there are some clubs that have struggled to maintain their camaraderie and fellowship because of the pandemic, but I don't think any club has been destroyed by it. You can have a hybrid system where instead of meeting physically every week, that sometimes you meet virtually. Busy people with young families find it convenient to have that flexibility. You can reduce the frequency of your meetings and substitute weekly activities with service projects or fellowship, as the Garden City Club has done from time to time. So there are 2 virtual meetings a month, and we add to that some sort of fellowship or service project, which counts as a meeting. Or because we don't have attendance, we don't count it as anything. We just schedule regular fellowship and service activities, which make up for the lack of a weekly meeting. It's really entirely up to the club. Please feel free to ignore this entirely, but it's an opportunity that you should consider. Because of the resistance, you may consider whether you would just remove the penalties for the time being, but keep attendance so persons are encouraged to come. and your makeups can be as creative as you wish. It's important that you don't, I would urge you to consider if you have a diverse club in terms of the demographic age, the age demographic, a professional demographic, gender, that sort of thing, that you don't just rush into it because it sounds new and exciting and it's going to revolutionize your club. It's important to be respectful to those who really do like the way the things have been done in the past. The change is unsettling, and you should approach it from a perspective of respect, where all persons feel as though they have some sort of buy-in to the new format of your club. If you go from a weekly club meeting at the end of this year after the pandemic is over and you say, well, we're just going to meet virtually every other week and we'll have a physical meeting once a month, you may find that a lot of persons are extremely unhappy by that because they look forward to the weekly fellowship and the weekly activity. So you need to find something that makes the club remain attractive for everyone affected. One of the things I found useful when we were doing the bylaws for Garden City is to include a sunset clause. Now, because we're forced to meet virtually for the time being, it seems like a really good idea. But I really have no idea how I'll feel about it a year from now. It works for me. And I actually do dread the idea of being forced to go to a club meeting every other week. The virtual meetings are fantastic. But a year from now, I may not like it. And so to say that this should be a permanent situation may be difficult. So we included a sunset clause that at a certain date, certain provisions that we've introduced where there's no termination, attendance is optional, frequency of meetings is every 2 weeks virtual, etc., etc., etc. All of these provisions have what is called a sunset clause, so they will expire. And if we don't reach an agreement about a new format, we will revert to the default provisions of the standard club constitution, which is that we meet weekly in person, etc., etc., etc. So it can be a trial period where you deploy it, and if you find at the end of the period there isn't still support for it, then it will expire. It's one way of ensuring that the bylaws can pass, because if there is so much resistance that you can't make any changes at all, so you can't even try to see if it works, then you wouldn't have the benefit of the experience. It might be useful to ask some person in your club who, is a bit of a Rotary nerd and who enjoys reading reports of the Council of Legislation to lead a discussion. If there isn't someone in your club, I'm sure there's someone in another club or in that you know from maybe outside of the country who likes this sort of thing and who will be happy to share new developments with you and discuss your problems with you. The beauty about it is that everybody has the same constitution and the bylaws are not that different because we start with the standard Rotary Club constitution. And so it's really the same thing. There's nothing different, except of course the dynamic of your club. I hope I'm doing good for time, but I'm out of slides. There's before I open for questions, there are a few things I should mention. Now, the Rotary International has a code of policies. For clubs that run Riley events, are you familiar with the codes and policies on harassment and abuse? These are things you should consider including in your bylaws so that there are clear expectations about relations and relationships among Rotarians, between Rotarians and Rotaractors and the general public. Rules are important. It's important to have clear rules when there is no conflict. Unfortunately, you can't address the adequacy of your rules when a conflict arises. So it's important to do it during when everything is going good and everybody's happy. It may be that you think your club is wonderful, that you have no problems, that you're always going to get along, but that might not always be so. You should consider incorporating formally the Rotary International Code of Policies into your club's bylaws. And you should look at the codes that Rotary has on sexual harassment and abuse and similar provisions that might become useful. The world is changing. I mean, we're more open to scrutiny. There are things like social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp, text messaging, email, all these things that everyone has a different approach to. Some people regard, their social media as private. I say what I like on Facebook, but it has nothing to do with my Rotary Club because I set it on my profile on Facebook. I'm not sure, I don't agree with the logic, but it's a common view. If you had clear rules that persons should consider that, things they do outside of Rotary in the community, including on social media, can be considered by the club in the course of disciplinary proceedings or a complaint, then there can be no dispute because you've entrenched it in your bylaws and your codes. And so it's clear that persons are bound by the same expectations you would have of Rotarians at a Rotary event, that you're entitled to maintain those expectations when they're outside of Rotary. Again, of course, views differ, but it's an opportunity to work it out and maybe get some sort of common ground on it. I should stop here for questions. Thank you.
PP Lisa?
Good afternoon, everyone. There were a few questions that came up, past President Ronald, and I noticed that DG Lyle and PDG David was helping with the answers for some of them. One of the first ones was trying to find out who was sitting on the Council of Legislation for us, and that is PDG Lara. Rotarian Mark was asking, if attendance is no longer mandatory, why is there need to continue to report it? And I noticed there was a long discussion within the chat indicating that although it's no longer mandatory, it does help in encouraging engagement. He went on to ask or suggest that his club has stopped reporting, but it was recently stated at a meeting that if they were to continue, and he's asking if they are to continue because it was reported to them that maybe DG Lyle can take that in terms of the mandatory reporting of attendance to the district. Can DG Lyle be unmuted, please?
Sean, can you unmute DG, please?
Okay. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, two things. The mandatory reporting remains in the Rotary Code of Policies, and it also remains in the District Manual of Procedures. As PDG David says, we are now looking way more at engagement. If I get the report on attendance, I look at it and it gives me an idea as to engagement. But if I don't get it, I will not be sending a message to your club to say, hey, by the way, I did not get your attendance. So I've left it much to the clubs, but I think it's something maybe we need to change in the District Manual of Procedure. If it's not required, then it shouldn't be there. So some clubs send, very few. But as I say, I do look at it just to get an idea. That's it.
Thank you, DG. The next question came from Rotarian Leah. What if your club's attendance rules include attendance at all club activities and not just club meetings? Past President Ronald, I think that would be in relation to reporting again and the percentage.
I'm not sure that there's anything that says that you can't require attendance at everything. It just seems excessive to me and really not in keeping with the new approach, which as DG says is to promote engagement. The reason for the new flexibility is to ensure that Rotarians who are busy and struggle to get to every meeting or get to a certain percentage of meetings are not pressured to resign or don't feel that they can't remain a Rotarian if their attendance is poor. Because you have the sort of situation where the club sort of ignores it for most people. Because a lot of those who struggle are well-known Rotarians, or popular, or well-liked, or contribute to the club in other ways. And then there's some poor soul who doesn't have, the same social connections, who is then told, well, you're not attending. So I don't know that there's anything wrong with the provision that attendance at club events is mandatory. It's not immediately obvious why that would be necessary.
Thank you, P.P. Ronald. Rotarian Jalim, sorry. There is a bylaw which speaks to establishing a bond for financial officers. Could you explain the relevance of this and how it can be established if necessary?
I saw the question. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with it. I don't think it's in the standard club constitution or the recommended constitution. It might be in the bylaws, but Rotary International bylaws, but I've never actually heard of it. I don't know if there's another experienced Rotarian who can offer some insight.
DG David has his hand.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. I was just going to say what Ronald said. I agree with. I don't think it's written in that way, but there are clubs that have formed themselves into corporations and or trusts in certain jurisdictions that and because of that, a lot of the directors of those trusts have at times taken out directors' indemnity insurance. So that's sort of as needed for the type of thing you're doing. It's not broad across the Rotary Club spectrum.
Thank you, PDG. I see PP Liz is here too. Okay, so those are generally all the questions that came in the chat. If anyone else has any other questions, I'd encourage them to raise their hand so that we can all mute you.
PP Lisa, I don't know if you'd allow me an opportunity before the end to say that I really appreciate the efforts of the person or persons who are responsible for the translation. I was horribly late, and I'd like to apologize and to thank them. And when next I see we get to an in-person district conference, I promise to buy drinks.
Thank you, PP Ronald. This is being recorded, so we'll be holding you to this. Rotarian Kevin has his hand up.
You wrote a question in the.
Okay, no, just a second.
Okay.
On Jalem's point about the bond, I don't know if it's something that was there in the past, because I recently did an update of our club's bylaws, which had been done since 2012 or 2013, and it was in our bylaws. We never enforced it. And when I went looking in the current bylaws and constitution for it, I couldn't find it. So I don't know if it's something that was a holdover from a previous period that had never been updated. Well, it had been updated on the Rotary side, And because we never updated our bylaws, it just stayed there as something from the past and probably needs to be updated. But I'm not a Rotary nerd, so someone else could do the work and look through the bylaws in great detail, but it wasn't there from my search.
Thank you, Rotarian Kevin. Do we have any other queries, clarifications, or Past President Ronald, aka Rotary Nerd? I'll take that as a no, and I'll pass you over back to Past Assistant Governor Luana.
Thank you, Pipi Lisa. I think your dog had a question.
He had many.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Pipi Ronald, for not a very informative session. I think we have all learned something new today. Just some quick housekeeping matters. Please continue to complete your Learning Center courses. We're still in phase 1, even though we're halfway through phase 2. We're still in phase 1, so we really would like you to continue with the Learning Center courses. And please register for the remaining pre-PETS sessions. The next session will be held on Monday, March 22nd. It will be facilitated by the one and only PDG David, and he will discuss recruitment and retention, a hot topic all the time. Registration for PETS and district conference is also open, and clubs are encouraged to utilize the club registration. And if that is done, then Rotarians do not need to register individually. Please remember also that there's a request for all Rotarians to attend PETS and district conference in your white branded polo t-shirts branded with the conference logo. And finally, please remember to submit names for your club trainers. And at the country level, AGs, please submit a representative to sit on the district training committee. We would like to have full representation on our training committee for the coming Rotary year. So please, we have quite a few countries still to send their representative, the name of their representative in. So please, AGs, we're depending on you, and also for the names of the club trainers. I will now ask Past President Cheryl to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. All protocols observed. Past President Ronald, I want to say thank you so much for facilitating this very important session on updating your club's constitution and bylaws. As District Governor-elect Sonia indicated, these documents form the foundation of the club's operations and should not be taken lightly. You took a topic which many may consider a bit boring, and you made it very interesting. I am certain that we all learned a lot of new, we had a lot of new learnings based on the questions that were asked. For me, one such was the utilization of the sunset clause on new articles. So I want to say thank you very much again for your very engaging session. I also would like to say thank you to DGE Sonia and the district training team, PAG Luana and team, for putting together all these sessions. I know that it would have taken a lot, and your commitment is admirable. I also want to thank all those behind the scenes, all the technical staff, etc., for everything that you're doing to ensure that these sessions flow smoothly. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night and take care now. Be safe.
Thank you, Pipi Cheryl. DGE, any closing remarks?
All I have to ask is that you take in the learning of tonight. You go back to your clubs, your constitutions, and your bylaws, and see how relevant they really are. pay attention to the things that have changed in the last Council of Legislation 2016, 2019, and make your club bylaws relevant. There's no sense having something in there that does not relate to today. Please add in the new things, the virtual meetings, which will not go away after COVID is gone. We will be doing things a little differently. So as I ask again, please use these sessions to ask questions, to learn, to listen, encourage the members of your club to come to these sessions, to learn about Rotary. And as we learn from the experts in the district and around the Rotary family. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you all on Monday, and have a safe weekend.
Thank you, DGE Sonia, and good evening, everyone. Please continue to stay safe and see you all on Monday. Bye.